Okay, so as some of you know, Johnny and I did some documentary about economics 5 years ago in 2010, right? And we discussed where we then saw things going. And at that time, Johnny and I also did something very interesting on the internet. We created the Radiant Zones Network. That's not a place that you'll just stumble onto. You would have to go on one of our sites and ask for permission and codes, and a little fee is helpful, and there you can then learn more. But because Johnny and I have been discussing all of these subjects for 7, 8 years already, and he studied it for much longer before, and so did I, but once we met, we became research buddies. And so today we have this phenomenal opportunity to talk with the master of the gold. And you live in the center of the activity where you actually see the flow of the stuff going from the west to the east. So, Johnny, you go ahead and give us the questions we had.
Yeah, sure. Let's start there with the flow from west to east.
Yes.
Can you tell us something that happened recently, or I mean, is the flow still that obvious as when Rickards visited the refiners and talking about the 3 shifts per day and so on?
Well, the flow is still continuing at the same level, which is the whole of the world production. At least 80-90% goes to China and India. And refiners are working 24-hour shifts. But it's, Rick has talked about they're working around the clock, and they're not working at maximum capacity. We mustn't think that. It's not now happening as it was in 2008 or at that time, for example, anyone who had a gold certificate with Johnson Matthey, the Perth Mint, they had to wait for delivery for 3 months or more, even up to 6 months, because then, and it's always a danger to hold a certificate rather than the physical, you shouldn't do that. But then, yes, everybody was producing at maximum capacity, including the Swiss refiners. They're not producing at maximum capacity now, and you can see that in the gold price. The gold price is stable. There is not massive demand, and gold is not on the front pages, but there's good demand. When they start working 4 shifts, that is when something will happen in the world, whether it's a stock market fall or uncertainty or worry about the fact that central banks don't have the gold. But at this point, that's not happening.
Okay, so you would say it's more stable than the price in dollar terms.
The physical market is totally stable. Yeah. It's amazing that you have all of the world production of gold, which is 2,500 tons of mining production and about 1,000 tons of scrap gold. All of that is being absorbed by the market, and of course, but the price, which is a paper price, does not reflect that.
Yeah.
It will at some point, but not today.
Yeah. And I mean, in Rickard's books, Currency Wars and the Death of Money, he talks about that flow from west to east, because China wants to, if the IMF and the SDR thing is going to happen, then they need a lot of gold to sit on as equal partners around that negotiating table.
Yes.
Do you agree with that analysis and why they're buying?
Well, the East have always been wiser than the West, and especially when it comes to money and investing and holding gold. And we know our Indian friends, when they have throughout history always bought gold, whatever the economic circumstances are. I mean, every family has to buy some gold, and every bride has to receive some gold. I always say that the Indians have the best funded pension system in the world because they all hold some gold, and nobody else has that. And so therefore, they'll be the richest pensioners in the world, I think, in the coming years when pension funds collapse.
Yeah.
Sorry, what you
No, I say, are you agreeing with the SDR thing with gold included as a likely scenario?
No, I'm not a fan of the SDR. I'm not a fan of an artificial construction.
I mean, either.
Because it will not hold. They will try, and of course China is, yes, They want to be a world power, and holding physical gold means that you have a much stronger seat at the negotiating table. So it's true that they're doing it for that reason, but at the same time, I think the West will probably try to create something without China and an SDR without a major participation of China, and they will probably include gold. But any construction which is artificial will not hold, because then somebody else, like then China and Russia, might decide they create another reserve currency. I hope that we will have free gold at some point, which, that is gold not tied to any currency, because that is the only true form of gold, and that is the only gold which will be priced correctly. As soon as you have governments fixing the price of gold to other currencies, you will have artificial manipulation of the price. But true gold can only happen if the world economy or the financial system has a major problem, and if it doesn't collapse, at least people lose all the trust in any other money, and therefore gold will be priced freely. And I think that will happen one day because of all the problems we have in the world. And I look forward to that, because at that point the paper market will disappear totally.
Yeah, I hope you're right. In a free gold world, where do you see silver going, and what role will silver be playing?
Now, as far as governments are concerned, silver doesn't play a role anymore. As I said before, governments probably have a lot less. Western governments probably have a lot less gold than they say they have, but they have no silver. There are virtually no stocks of silver in the world, and therefore I don't see silver being part of a reserve currency. When the gold-silver ratio is in the 70s now, so gold divided by silver is about 70 times. And we know that it's been down to around 15, and in the last 2011 it was about 30, the ratio. Which means that today, relative to gold, silver is undervalued, and I think initially when we have the run-up in gold, silver will go a lot faster, definitely. So from a speculative point of view, I think silver could be interesting. From a wealth preservation point of view, I like gold better because, first of all, for normal investors, the volatility in silver is unacceptable and would be too emotional for them. And secondly, in Europe, for example, we have VAT, value-added tax on silver, and therefore it's not a practical metal to hold as a currency, and it's also too heavy. So I think if you want to, as an investment position, gold could be silver could be more interesting than gold. But even in the Weimar Republic, at the very end of the Weimar Republic, in the hyperinflationary stage, gold went up a lot more than silver, because then it was at the very end, the gold-silver ratio, I think it went up to well over 100, 150, something like that.
Okay.
So I think if you hold both gold and silver, I think at some point, if silver goes up substantially and faster than gold, then you should switch to gold.
Okay.
At some point.
At what ratio would you switch? 20, 15?
I'd be happy at 30, because that would be an
30.
important
Okay.
level,
That's
and I don't mind if it goes to 15. No one has ever gone bust by taking profit too early.
That's true. That's very true.
And as I said, if you put it in gold, you'll get the ride anyway.
Yeah. I mean, this gold-silver ratio have fluctuated over the centuries from as low as, I don't know, the 5-8 region in some places over a short period of time. And in China, silver has been money a lot longer than gold, and I think gold became money in China in the 1900s, so very late in the game. So, having said that, what do you think Chinese investors or Chinese consumers look at silver differently than we do in the West?
Well, they have done, but when you say it only became, there was silver until 1900, remember, China, like every country in the world, used gold 5,000 years ago, and so gold has always been used as a method of payment. As I see it now, it's all about gold in China, and rather than silver.
Okay.
So I don't see that. Of course, they say that silver is poor man's gold, and it's possible, and this is why you will have silver going up faster at some point, is that as gold becomes more expensive, people will then start investing in silver instead, because now you have a 70-to-1 ratio, and probably as long as that ratio is at least above 30, I think there'll be more silver buying. But I don't think that the Chinese focus is all on gold rather than silver.
Yeah. So there's also a debate on how much gold China, I mean, in terms of the central bank, actually have.
Yes.
I mean, Rickards is talking about, I don't know, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 tons or something like that. But then other analysis, like, I don't know, Jim Willey, and they're talking like 20,000 plus tons.
Yes.
What should we believe? What do you think is reasonable?
I love good old Jim Willey and the hat-trick letter, as he writes. And he's got very good information on many things. Sometimes he exaggerates too much, I think, and everything that he says isn't always true, although overall I think he's an excellent writer and analyst. Nevertheless, nobody knows, that's a good thing, nobody knows how much any country has today, because there's not an audit in the West, there's not an audit in the East of central banks holding. We only know that China has been buying massively in the last few years. What we don't know is that of their buying of let's say now 1,000 tons a year, or over 1,000 tons a year, 1,200, we don't know how much of that goes to the people and how much goes to the government. So therefore it's very difficult to estimate how much the government holds. I mean, they are still showing around 1,000 tons of holding China. Everybody knows that they have a lot more. Whether they have 5,000, or I think they could even have up to 10,000 tons in my view, but that's a guesstimate. I don't know. I doubt they have as much as 20,000. I don't think they do.
Okay, interesting. Whoops. I had a long discussion with Rickards on the euro a couple of years ago.
Yes.
We met at a conference in Bratislava. And as you know, he is pretty bullish on the euro.
Yes.
And his arguments, if I understand him correctly, is that, number one, the euro is a political project, which means that all the political capital, so to speak, is invested in it, and the political elites will not let it go without losing their face. And the other argument is that the eurozone, I mean the central banks of the eurozone, have approximately 12,000 tons, if I remember correctly, allegedly, and the US allegedly 8,000. So what I can't wrap my head around is really if those two arguments is enough to save the euro or to make the euro sustainable long term. What's your view?
You know, currency, the value of currencies, as we discussed before, is not a question of absolute values, it's a question of relative values. If we measure currencies against each other, of course you should measure currencies against gold, but if you measure them against each other, which obviously Jim Rickards did in your discussion, then, and he obviously talked about euro against the dollar, and I think the dollar run is finished. You know, when I started working in Switzerland, there was 4 Swiss francs 30. It was a long time ago, I have to admit. 4 Swiss francs 30 to $1, and today it is 92 Swiss cents to the dollar. So the dollar has been falling continuously for the last, well, since 1970 roughly, when the gold backing of the dollar was abolished. So the dollar is an extremely weak currency, has fallen throughout the last 40 odd years, will continue to fall as long as they mismanage the economy and print money to the extent that they have. So I think now we've seen the small correction up in the dollar, that's finished, and therefore the beneficiaries will be all other currencies, including the euro. I think that also, I agree that the euro will go up against the dollar, not for the right reason though. I mean, because the eurozone is in a mess too, and there is no reason for the euro to be strong, but measured against the dollar, I think it will be, because I think the dollar will be weak.
Yeah, and again, and all currencies will sort of fail against gold.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah.
Continue the race to the bottom, absolutely.
Yeah, and I like what you said about not being a gold bug, so to speak. I've got the same viewpoint that I'd love to be more in love with other asset classes than gold.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I can't see any better option.
Yes.
Do you, and so my basic question is, when do you get out? So when do we know that gold is overvalued? We have to measure it against something else, right?
Yes.
So one possible way would be, and it has been argued that when the Dow Jones Index and the price of gold meets on a 1-to-1 level,
Yes.
that would be an indication. Would you agree to that, or do you see another?
Yes, it's a good point, and I always measure whatever I can against gold, because that is real money, and that's how you actually show what the real move is in whatever unit you measure with Dow Jones or a currency, etc. And of course, since '99, the Dow Jones and most stock markets in the world are down between 60 and 85% against gold.
Yeah.
Now we've seen a correction up in that ratio. That means the stock markets in the last, since 2011, have gone up faster than gold, because gold has been going sideways and corrected. But nevertheless, this is what we called in chart terms a dead cat bounce. You have this massive fall of the Dow gold ratio, and now you bounced up like this, roughly, a little bit up. And we are, if I'm right with the fact that I think the Dow and the stock market are due for the next downturn, I think that ratio will now start falling again. And 1-to-1, I think, is the minimum projection I will have, and I think most of these, this is where we were in 1980 when gold peaked at 850. Dow and gold were around 800, both of them. I think markets always overshoot, so I would not be surprised to see at least the ratio going down to 0.5-to-1 or even lower. So I do agree totally with that. That's where you're going to see the trend. So gold will be a lot better investment than the stock market. Now, at what level will that be? That depends to some extent on what degree of hyperinflation we have. I mean, if you get 100 trillion gold, like in the Weimar Republic, the stock market is not going to stay at 15,000 or 17,000. Stock market will also show an inflationary rise, but that's meaning that relative to gold, it will still fall to at least 1-to-1 and probably lower than 0.5-to-1 in my view.
And in my research, I found that in the Weimar Republic, at the very end, when the parabolic inflationary period started, gold outperformed the stock market.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think gold, yes, absolutely. Gold will outperform every market at that point, and of course, it will therefore become overvalued. You get these signs of overvalued markets. We all have our different signals, and you have the shoeshine boy, J.P. Morgan is talking about when he talks about investing in stocks in '29. That's the time. I had my 80, she was about 80-year-old aunt in Florida, retired. She'd never ever invested in stocks before, but of course in the late 90s she was caught up in the boom like everybody else and bought the Nasdaq. And my mother, her sister, told me how much money she was making all the time. And then she said she's so good at it, she's now teaching her cleaning lady to invest also.
Yeah.
And to me that was a good sign that this is the end of the market. When my aunt, who didn't know anything about investing, taught her cleaning lady, this was the end. This was the end of '99. I knew that. And then the Nasdaq fell 80%.
Yeah, and I mean, you never ever hear people in the subway talking to you about gold or you're someone that you just meet.
No.
Nobody brings up the subject if you don't initiate that conversation, which I do frequently, by the way.
No, but gold will also reach a point when it's overloved and overvalued. It will do. But as we talked about before, you've got to look at then what else is there to invest in before you get rid of it.
Yeah. So what are you doing today? We're now in May 2015.
Yeah.
What are you doing now with your own money? How much gold do you accumulate? Silver, other asset classes?
Well, if you look at someone who's been looking at risk and looking at these markets for quite a long time, obviously I have to put my money where my mouth is.
Sure.
And I did recommend to our investors in 2002 at $300 to put up to 50%. Of course, some people will not put 50%, but some did, because we have the type of clients who understand this better than the average. Now, so I would obviously have done the same, and today I think the risk has grown exponentially since 2002. So therefore, I would not be opposed to having more in gold and having a much higher percentage. But I think what I have is totally irrelevant, because everyone's got to decide for themselves what they feel happy with. It's no use telling someone you should have 100% in gold or you should have 50% in gold. If you have enough free money, investment money, that actually you don't need, I think you should put enough into gold that you feel that at least you have a nest egg to fall back on if there are problems. I, of course, do not trust the banking system. I think so that you have the risk of having money in the bank, which includes also obviously custodial risk of stocks, etc. And also I do have real confidence in governments to continue to destroy the value of paper money. And therefore holding paper money to me is not the right thing. So therefore, yes, I would have more gold rather than less, and as I said, each one has to decide for themselves. Now, silver, as I said, it's more of a speculative thing, so relatively I hold not that much silver, and to me that's just opportunistic, it's not wealth preservation.
Okay. So let's try to move into some more fringe or alternative subjects.
Right.
There is a lady out there on YouTube called Karen Hudas.
Yeah.
And she is trying to convince her viewers that there's a huge amount of physical gold in Hawaii of all places. And she claims it's 170,000 tons.
Yeah.
What's your take on that story?
Well, throughout history we've had these type of stories, and of course that one is well known. Funnily enough, I think yesterday somebody sent me an email with a link to that story.
Yeah.
So it goes around everywhere. It's sensational. I don't believe in it one iota that is true, and I pay no attention to that whatsoever. I mean, you can calculate roughly how much gold has been produced worldwide since the beginning of time, and that's around 170,000 tons, and it's assumed that all of that gold still exists in one form or another, jewelry, gold bars, etc. And of course some of it might be in the ground and hidden and not found, but nevertheless, so the total is around 170,000 tons, that's the best estimate. And then somebody comes up with there's another 180,000 tons, I don't believe in it at all.
Yeah.
So I think it's absolute nonsense, and we don't need to pay any attention to that.
Good, thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
So how could we be wrong? This is my question. Could something like Bitcoin just take over the world, and there we go, we're sitting there with useless gold?
To me, I mean, all of us have looked at Bitcoin one way or another, because initially it was hoped and thought that this could be money outside the system. But if you then look at the details of it, first of all, we have seen so many events where Bitcoins have disappeared out of the system. One exchange all of a sudden lost a lot of Bitcoins, or because nobody actually knows what is inside there. And this, to me, this is electronic money, and to me that's similar to paper money.
Yeah.
It doesn't replace paper money at all. Okay, if it were, it would be fantastic as a payment system outside government control. But this is where you have the other problem. It will not, if it becomes a major area which people will use to make payments, then governments will not accept it. Now, we had a recent case of one exchange in the US who were fined $700,000 for not filing a report of a Bitcoin payment. They didn't even make the payment, they didn't file a report, $700,000, fine. So what I'm saying is that Bitcoin is already being looked at by governments. They will never accept big amounts of money being transferred outside of their control. Now we've looked at Bitcoins backed by gold, and you actually just use gold, always back it by gold, and you then just make transfers in Bitcoin. But you see, government's not going to allow that either, because you can't. Today you can transfer small amounts in Bitcoin. They wouldn't allow you to transfer $10 million in Bitcoin because you wouldn't get it out of any bank. You couldn't do anything with it. So sadly, I don't think Bitcoin is the solution, and therefore, if it's going to happen, it will become part of the banking system, and all banks are looking at Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. Every single bank is looking at it, which means it just becomes part of the system, will be totally regulated, and therefore it serves no purpose. It's not real money.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.